Judge Clarence Thomas stared down from the bench, eyes cold and unflinching, as Malcolm Jones, a determined black attorney with precisely pressed sleeves, a meticulously knotted tie, and an unwavering moral compass, rose to deliver his arguments before a packed courtroom teeming with anticipation. Cameras flashed in the gallery, reporters jostled for better views, and tension crackled through the air like electricity. From the first sentence Malcolm uttered, everyone understood something extraordinary was unfolding. "Your Honor," Malcolm began, voice trembling slightly, "I respectfully submit that this case demands clear, impartial consideration." Thomas drummed his fingers on the bench, a curt flicker of dismissal crossing his face. "You think I haven't heard that 1,000 times, Counselor?" he sneered, voice dripping contempt. The gallery seemed to freeze, reporters holding their breath in expectation of further clashes. Malcolm steadied himself, refusing to wither under the justice's scornful glare. He had spent countless nights preparing, bracing for this moment, but he never imagined Thomas's hostility would be so brazen. Still, Malcolm recalled why he'd taken on this case. His client, a small business owner named Patricia, alleged systematic discrimination by a major corporation. Malcolm believed the Constitution demanded that every citizen be protected, regardless of race or status. Thomas, however, offered no quarter. "Go on," he barked, leaning back in his seat with an almost bored demeanor, as though counting the seconds until he could dismiss Malcolm's arguments. Oblivious or indifferent to the judge's condescension, Malcolm pressed forward, citing precedents, brandishing official records, highlighting patterns that no fair court could ignore. His voice grew stronger with each reference, feeding off the moral clarity that had driven him this far. "Your Honor," he continued, "these documents demonstrate how my client was subjected to unconstitutional practices." Thomas let out a derisive snort. "Documents," he said, flipping through them and shaking his head. "Paper piles do not impress me." A wave of discomfort rippled through onlookers, many of whom recognized the hostility radiating from the bench. Nearby, the opposing counsel, Rebecca Caldwell, stood poised but uneasy, uncertain how to navigate the judge's dismissive tone. She had never witnessed a justice so blatantly undermine an attorney, especially one who had come so thoroughly prepared. Malcolm's heart pounded. He sensed the looming humiliation but refused to relent. Quietly, he reminded himself that the law was on his side, that justice, no matter how precarious, would eventually prevail if he stayed the course. "I only wish to ensure fairness, Your Honor," he said, forcing composure into every syllable. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Fairness," he echoed, nearly spitting the word. "We're here for the Constitution, not naive fantasies." Gasps fluttered around the courtroom, some spectators exchanging uncomfortable glances. Yet Malcolm pressed forward. He summarized key legal frameworks, invoked the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and reasoned that his client deserved recourse. With every point, Thomas's frown deepened, as though Malcolm's very presence offended him. Eventually, the judge cut him off. "I've heard enough, Counselor. If you can't offer something more substantial, this will be over quickly." Malcolm's cheeks burned, but he refused to let anger dominate. Respectfully, he said, "I'm simply laying the groundwork for the central argument. Allow me to continue, and I'll show this court why my client's rights were trampled." At that, Thomas slammed his gavel. "I decide what matters," he snapped. "You do not enlighten me." Malcolm swallowed hard, summoning every ounce of composure. He glanced at the jury box, though in this proceeding, the judge's verdict mattered most. Somewhere near the back, an unassuming figure watched intently, noting every exchange. Former President Barack Obama, who had come quietly to observe. He had slipped in without fanfare, but his presence, once recognized, radiated a subtle but powerful energy. Thomas noticed him almost immediately, though he offered no sign. The tension escalated each time Thomas interrupted Malcolm's statements. Whenever Malcolm attempted to cite a higher court opinion, Thomas scoffed. "Irrelevant," or "Don't misquote jurisprudence you barely comprehend." Nearby, Rebecca flinched at the ferocity. Though representing the opposing side, she believed in decorum. Malcolm soldiered through, citing case law after case law. Finally, in exasperation, Thomas tossed aside the reference documents. "Your so-called evidence," he hissed, "seems to rely on assumptions. Are you sure you're fit to be standing in this courtroom?" In that moment, Malcolm felt an indignant surge. Yet, he paused, reminding himself that a show of anger would achieve nothing but defeat. He steadied his voice. "Your Honor," he said, "I've dedicated my career to understanding these precedents thoroughly." Thomas's smirk was swift, aimed to belittle. "Maybe find another career. Counselor, you're not convincing me." An uneasy hush fell. Even the reporters stopped scribbling, sensing the air had turned toxic. Malcolm's lips tightened. He was about to retort when Obama stood, smoothing his jacket, and stepped into the aisle. Head snapped toward him, murmurs rising in surprise. Thomas's gaze hardened, yet a flicker of uncertainty danced in his eyes. Obama addressed the courtroom politely but firmly. "Your Honor," he began, "I apologize for the interruption, but I've been observing these proceedings with concern. May I request a moment to speak?" Thomas's jaw set in defiance. "Mr. President," he said tersely, "you no longer occupy the White House. You cannot simply stroll in and weigh in on legal matters." Obama offered a calm, measured smile. "I understand. I'm merely requesting your courtesy, the same courtesy traditionally extended to any citizen who seeks clarity in a matter of constitutional significance." The tension in the gallery soared. No one dared breathe or shift. Thomas's lips pursed, grappling with the optics of denying Obama a voice. Finally, grudgingly, he gestured. "Fine, but keep it brief. This court is on a tight schedule." Obama nodded appreciatively. He joined Malcolm at the podium, placing a hand on the younger man's shoulder. Malcolm exhaled, relief intermingling with renewed determination. "Your Honor," Obama said, addressing Thomas directly, "I respect the authority of this bench, yet I must remind us all that our system rests upon fair and respectful consideration of arguments, regardless of who presents them. The Constitution demands more than perfunctory dismissals." Thomas bristled, drumming his fingers loudly. "I know the Constitution. I don't need a lecture from you." Obama held his composure. "I do not doubt your familiarity, but we must never forget that dignity in the courtroom underpins public trust. When we undermine counsel through disparagement, we undermine our system as a whole." Murmurs stirred among spectators, many nodding in agreement. Thomas's expression darkened, yet he seemed momentarily at a loss for a retort. Malcolm could feel his pulse roaring, uncertain whether the judge would erupt or relent. Thomas glared, eyes flicking to Obama's hand still resting on Malcolm's shoulder. "You realize you're meddling in a live proceeding?" Obama gave a small nod. "I'm aware, but justice is not served by intimidation. Counselor Jones deserves the opportunity to present his case without ridicule." At these words, Thomas's mouth set in a thin line. He visibly struggled with how to respond, clearly unaccustomed to public admonition. The silent crowd watched, transfixed. Cameras aimed at the bench. Eventually, Thomas exhaled. He seemed to weigh the implications. Then he nodded stiffly. "Fine," he muttered. "Continue. Counselor Jones. But do not waste this court's time with unsubstantiated theories." He flicked his gaze to Obama. "And do not assume you can simply direct these proceedings." Obama lowered his head in a sign of respect. "Thank you, Your Honor. I only hope for a fair process." He squeezed Malcolm's shoulder, whispered a quick encouragement, then returned to his seat. Malcolm lifted his chin, poised to resume. He presented his arguments more confidently. Mindful that the entire courtroom was now thoroughly engaged, he itemized each constitutional violation, weaving the core premises with supporting documentation. Thomas's interruptions were fewer. His mocking tone diminished, though flashes of condescension remained. Rebecca Caldwell, seeing the improved dynamic, carefully presented her defense, her voice deliberate but never resorting to cheap shots. She disagreed with Malcolm's interpretation, but recognized the shift in the court's temperament. During a short recess, tension spilled into the corridors. Reporters cornered Malcolm, shoving microphones in his face, demanding comments about Thomas's humiliation and Obama's intervention. Malcolm responded diplomatically, focusing on the client's claims rather than personal vendettas. Meanwhile, Obama avoided the press, quietly stepping away to make a phone call, presumably ensuring his presence wouldn't overshadow the real issue. When court reconvened, Thomas addressed the chamber, carefully modulating his voice. In light of the arguments and the seriousness of these claims, I intend to review the full record before reaching a decision. The Constitution is paramount, and this bench will not ignore relevant evidence. Malcolm's shoulders eased, though Thomas had not retracted his earlier hostility. The shift from outright derision to a more restrained approach felt like a minor victory. The hearing concluded for the day, with Thomas setting a schedule for final arguments the following week. Outside, a throng of activists cheered Malcolm's name, commending him for standing up. The humiliating display Thomas had unleashed became an instant headline, while Obama's role in tempering the situation sparked widespread discussion on social media. People debated whether the former president should have intervened or simply let the process unfold. Some insisted that his presence restored balance. Others claimed it overshadowed Malcolm's legal prowess. Malcolm, however, stood by the window of his modest office that evening, staring into the glow of city lights. He couldn't help but feel immense gratitude for Obama's intervention. Without that timely act, he might have faced total dismissal. He also felt a profound sense of responsibility. I have to earn this victory on my own merits, he told himself, recalling the judge's scathing remarks. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to his chambers, wrestling with a gnawing sense of indignation. Decades of service on the bench had never prepared him for public admonishment, let alone from Barack Obama. Memories of their ideological clashes flooded his mind. He tried to quell them, focusing on the details of Malcolm's case. He told himself his reaction stemmed from seeing yet another attorney who presumed to challenge him. But in quiet moments, the memory of Malcolm's calm under fire chipped at his certainty. Days passed, and the media frenzy showed no sign of abating. Commentators replayed clips of the confrontation, Thomas's sneer, Obama's measured rebuke, Malcolm's unwavering resolve. Pundits argued about the deeper implications for the justice system, while legal forums buzzed with debate on judicial bias and respect. Malcolm found support in corners he never expected. Other attorneys, even those who had faced Thomas's temperament, reached out with encouragement. Meanwhile, he meticulously prepared for the next hearing, determined to refine his arguments further. Obama maintained a careful distance, not wanting his involvement to overshadow the judicial process. Still, he sent a brief note, "Remember, dignity is our strongest weapon. Persist." Malcolm read it repeatedly, drawing courage from the words. On the day of final arguments, the courtroom overflowed with spectators. Tensions were palpable, especially when Thomas took his seat. Expression stony yet subdued compared to before. Malcolm began, voice calm, once again highlighting the legal injustices his client faced. This time, Thomas allowed him to speak without constant interruption. Rebecca Caldwell offered the corporation's perspective, defending against accusations of discrimination. The difference was striking, no longer overshadowed by caustic insults. The discourse settled into a more typical adversarial but respectful rhythm. Malcolm concluded by framing the fundamental question at stake. Your Honor, does the Constitution not guarantee every citizen equal treatment, regardless of color or background? If we deny that principle, what remains of our democracy? Thomas met his gaze, nodding slowly, as though acknowledging the gravity of the inquiry. Then, in a voice lacking its earlier venom, the judge spoke. I will weigh the arguments carefully and deliver a verdict shortly. This proceeding is now adjourned. With that, he rapped his gavel. A wave of chatter surged among the spectators. Outside, cameras flashed wildly once again. Malcolm, drained but hopeful, made his way through the crowd, giving only minimal statements. Journalists clamored for a sensational angle. Did you feel vindicated by Obama's defense? Has Judge Thomas changed his attitude? Malcolm answered politely, emphasizing due process. Obama, absent from the day's proceedings, released no public statement, preferring to let Malcolm's arguments stand on their own. A week later, the day of the ruling arrived. The scene was no less dramatic, with activists, reporters, and curious citizens packed into the courtroom. The bailiff called for order, and Thomas entered, face impassive. Malcolm's nerves jangled. This verdict could shape the course of countless discrimination suits in the future. Thomas cleared his throat, hands clasped, surveying the silent courtroom. After reviewing the materials and arguments, I have reached a conclusion based on the Constitution and prevailing law. The plaintiff, Miss Patricia, has demonstrated her rights were indeed infringed. Therefore, the court rules in her favor. The crowd erupted in hushed applause, quickly stifled by the bailiff's glare. Malcolm closed his eyes, relief and triumph flooding him. Thomas continued, though I may disagree with certain interpretations, it is clear that protections under the 14th Amendment apply to her situation and must be upheld. Damages are to be awarded, and relevant measures enacted to prevent further violations. A hush fell again as he looked directly at Malcolm. Counselor Jones, let it not be said you haven't earned your place in this courtroom. With that, he rose. The hearing ended. Malcolm felt his knees threaten to buckle. This was more than a verdict. It was a vindication of his commitment to justice. Reporters descended, forming a circle of microphones, while Patricia burst into tears beside him, hugging him fiercely. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling. No, Malcolm replied, voice cracking. Thank you for trusting me. They made their way to the courthouse steps, where throngs of supporters cheered. Some carried signs proclaiming victory for civil rights. Others chanted Malcolm's name, calling him a hero. He waved shyly, overwhelmed by the attention. That evening, as the city buzzed over the ruling, Obama reached out with a congratulatory phone call. I knew you'd do it on your own merits, he said, voice warm over the line. Malcolm felt a lump in his throat. I owe you a debt, he responded sincerely. You kept me from being shut down. Obama demurred, insisting that Malcolm's fortitude won the day, not his own intervention. Regardless, the story of how Thomas humiliated a black lawyer, only to be called out by the former president in open court, became a powerful narrative about resilience and the importance of decorum within the judiciary. In the weeks that followed, public discourse focused on the newfound scrutiny of judicial conduct. Organizations called for improved accountability measures, while academics dissected the hearing's transcript, pointing to the moment Obama intervened as an example of rebalancing power dynamics. Thomas himself returned to the bench for other cases, faced with watchful eyes, analyzing his every reaction. In subtle ways, he seemed changed, though never explicitly offering an apology. His old condescending sneer recurred less frequently, and attorneys reported fewer interruptive tirades. Some surmised that having his authority questioned by such a prominent figure forced him into reflection. Malcolm, however, stayed grounded. Offers to lecture at law schools began pouring in, and invitations to appear on national talk shows multiplied. He accepted some, wary of turning into a political pawn or sensational figure. His primary goal remained advocating for those who had no voice. In private moments, he couldn't help but replay the memory of that initial humiliation. He had stood there, a relatively unknown attorney, face burning with anger, while a Supreme Court justice belittled his entire professional worth. Yet he emerged undefeated, guided by a moral compass and buoyed by Obama's timely challenge. As time passed, Thomas's ruling in Patricia's case stood as a meaningful precedent. Other marginalized individuals found renewed courage to challenge institutions that undermined their rights. Malcolm represented several, winning more often than not, building a reputation as an unflinching champion for the underdog. Public fascination with the original drama persisted. Journalists interviewed Rebecca Caldwell, the opposing counsel, who admitted she felt relief that the final proceedings stayed within professional boundaries. The tension was excruciating, she recalled. I'd never seen a judge attack a lawyer so personally. I'm grateful Mr. Jones had the resilience to endure. Meanwhile, Obama addressed the incident sparingly, perhaps to avoid overshadowing Malcolm's accomplishments. At one public forum, however, he touched on it briefly. We must remember, he told the audience, that civility is the backbone of our democracy. We cannot allow intimidation to rule our courts. Applause thundered in response, many in the crowd recalling the moment he had confronted Thomas in real time. For Malcolm, life shifted into a new gear. He opened a larger practice, bringing on associates who shared his passion for justice. The more cases they tackled, the more they saw systematic flaws that required urgent reform. Motivated by his own experience, Malcolm pushed for policies that would hold judges to clear standards of respect. Despite being proud of his achievements, he avoided flaunting his reputation. He often told younger attorneys, "The real victory is for those we serve, not our own egos." Yet, whenever asked about that day in court, he'd speak candidly. I won't deny the sting of being humiliated by a figure as towering as Clarence Thomas. But in that humiliation, I found clarity of purpose. The story became almost legend in legal circles, repeated for new generations of law students. Many saw it as a lesson in both professional ethics and personal fortitude. Malcolm's example showed how an attorney could stare down scorn and still emerge with integrity intact. For Thomas, the chapter remained a complicated mark on his legacy. Some praised his eventual decision, seeing it as evidence he could overcome personal biases. Others believed he had simply recognized the case was too strong to ignore, especially under heightened public scrutiny. Perhaps it was a mix of both. Malcolm never received a private apology, nor did he expect one. To him, winning the case for Patricia and thereby setting a vital precedent was enough. He had faced a towering obstacle and proven that neither cruelty nor arrogance could blot out the truth of constitutional protections. In his spare time, Malcolm penned a reflective piece for a legal journal, charting the intersection of judicial temperament and civil rights. He pointedly avoided attacking Thomas in a personal sense. Instead, he stressed the importance of accountability and the destructive impact of dismissive attitudes toward legitimate arguments. The piece garnered acclaim, fueling more dialogue about reform. Some speculated that Thomas might have read it, though if he did, he offered no public reaction. In the end, the story resonated far beyond the initial courthouse showdown. It reinforced the idea that no one, not even a Supreme Court justice, should remain unchecked when fairness is at stake. It underscored how a figure like Obama, observing injustice, could still step forward for the greater good, and how a young black lawyer refused to be bullied, thereby forging a path for countless others. Ultimately, the day came when Patricia's awarded damages allowed her to recover financially and expand her small business. She sent Malcolm a heartfelt note with a photograph of her newly renovated storefront. "You've given my dreams a second chance," she wrote. Malcolm kept that photo framed in his office, beside letters from other clients whose lives he had impacted. Looking at them reminded him of the cost of courage and the depth of rewards for pushing through fear. Though gossip lingered about the bitter exchange between Thomas and Obama, two men with diverging worldviews, Malcolm preferred to view it through the lens of justice. "What matters is that the law prevailed," he would say whenever the topic arose. Over the years, the tension of that day gradually faded into the broader tapestry of court rulings and legislative changes. Yet those who were present or watched the video clips, never forgot how precarious justice can feel when power is wielded unfairly. They also remembered the moment a former president quietly stood up, risking criticism, to ensure a fair shot for an attorney about to be crushed by judicial wrath. In quiet reflections, Malcolm sometimes replayed the instant in which Thomas sneered, as if to crush his entire future, and how Obama's measured voice interrupted that dissent. It reinforced Malcolm's conviction that everyone, no matter how unassuming, deserves respect when they step into a courtroom seeking justice. And so the tale spread among the legal community, retold by starry-eyed law students, cited in articles about judicial integrity, woven into speeches on the importance of maintaining civility. Each retelling served as a reminder: power can corrupt the spirit of law when wielded thoughtlessly. Yet a steadfast advocate and sometimes a well-timed intervention can right the balance. And if any lingering shadow of doubt remained over Thomas's bench, it was tempered by the knowledge that the Constitution ultimately transcended personal biases. Long after the cameras turned elsewhere, Malcolm continued his work, championing the powerless, bearing in mind that humiliations do not define a person's responses do. He took solace in the fact that when a justice tried to belittle him, he didn't crumble. Instead, he stood firm, buoyed by unwavering faith in justice, the timely voice of a president, and a belief that the law, in its purest sense, would protect those who refuse to yield.